Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, and we are going to dive right in with a great discussion today with the one and only Sheldon Richman. He's an author with more accomplishments than can be named in libertarian circles. Sheldon, welcome back to the show.
I'm very happy to be back. Thank you for inviting me. And I like that you used the word, I think, discussion.
I did use the word discussion.
Rather than that other D word, debate.
Dick? Oh.
I wouldn't use that word. Unless you were named Richard.
Or if you were being a Richard, maybe if someone's being a Richard. But anyways, this is why I love Sheldon Richman, because he's the pinnacle of politeness. So yes, we're going to have a discussion about our differences pertaining to. It's interesting. The way I want to phrase it, because our goals are almost identical, if not identical, in that we both want human beings to be free. That's what we want. What we disagree about is, I think, the best method of attaining that freedom. So you are, would you describe yourself as an anarcho-capitalist? I don't want to mislabel you.
That would apply, sure.
Okay.
It's usually not my lately I've been using the term market-ordered anarchism.
Market-ordered anarchism.
But that's awkward and long.
It is, but it's okay. We're aiming for precision. Where I believe that the best way to achieve freedom would be in a limited, with a government that is limited to the protection of individual rights. At the outset, Sheldon, I do want to say that I think that the prospects of either of our preferences being achieved in the next 20 years are very, very slim. So to some people, these discussions come off as almost like irrelevant. Like, why are you guys even talking about it? But to me, the reason to talk about it is because the only way we could ever achieve what we want is to convince enough people that we are right. And the only way to do that is by talking about it, right? So I'm trying to think of a good place to start. First of all, I guess would be, what is the sort of ANCAP or anarcho-capitalist tradition that most resembles your point of view or most feeds your perspective?
Okay, well, to back up a second, when you talked about we both want the same thing, I think that's true. We want an environment in which people are free in order to find the best way to flourish as a rational human beings. So that's very general. That's very general. But another way to put it is our disagreement is over what is the best form of governance, right? NCE at the end of that word. Because at least my style of statelessness or anarchism is not devoid of governance. It's devoid of a ruler or rule through the state. But me and the people I've learned from put a whole lot of emphasis on law. And Hayek in his famous trilogy, Law, Legislation, and Liberty, stresses in the beginning of that the difference between law and legislation, which I think the average guy on the street doesn't distinguish those two things. They probably think, oh, law is something the legislature passes and the executive, the governor, or the president signs. That's law. So there's an old tradition about law being something else. It grows out of custom and therefore is rooted in people's actions, activities, which is goal-directed and usually aimed at improving their situations through cooperation with other people. So that's my kind of a starting point. Now you asked, who say your question again, whose philosophy of anarchism is closest to mine?
Yes, but I first want to clarify something. You're not saying that legislation is not law, right? You're just saying that it's not the only type of
law.
No,
I agree with Hayek that it is not law. It's decree. At all. It's decree. Now, okay. Maybe the people voted for the legislators who then passed that, but that is not law. Now, it may, and I would add maybe coincidentally, line up with natural law, right? Sometimes it does coincide, and Spooner pointed that out, Lysander Spooner. But other times it's quite a bit off from natural law, right? It violates the natural law. You'll agree with that. Government violates natural law all the time these days.
Well, sure. I mean, see, this is where I'm already gonna like have a what's the word I'm looking for? I can't even think of it. But going back to the sophists in ancient Greece, they distinguished the two. They said that there's nothing about legislation that makes it, sacrosanct, that it's just the arbitrary decrees of people. So I get the distinction between legislation and what we would refer to as natural law. It just seems to me that, like, I mean, for instance, in Connecticut, you have laws against murder, laws against shoplifting. These were passed by the legislature. There's all kinds of bad laws, laws against drug consumption, drug selling, that sort of thing. I don't know how those wouldn't be laws. So if somebody gets arrested, you say, well, they're breaking the law. So how isn't that law? I get that it's not a moral thing, but it still would seem to me to be law.
I just think it's a distinction rooted in history that's worth keeping, making, and informing people about, which is what Hayek was doing. I mean, I don't abstain. I've never committed murder. Okay. I'll confess that right here. I've never committed murder.
You're going to go out on a limb?
I go out on a limb. Some of my associates may frown on me for that. But my reason for that is not that the state I live in passed legislation against murder. I mean, if they were to repeal it tomorrow, I can guarantee you I would not be looking for a way to commit murder. Now, on the other hand, I tend to abstain from jaywalking because I don't want to get a ticket. Now, I'm kind of exaggerating. That's not much enforced where I live. I guess in some places it is. But I don't, run a red. Well, I don't run a red light even if I see nobody's coming, so I'm doing it safely. I mean, sometimes in an emergency, you might do that at late at night or something, because I don't want to get a ticket. So there, I'm obeying it because the legislature has passed legislation, and there are going to be consequences like taking money from me or my driver's license that I don't want. But murder, theft, torture, rape, false imprisonment, kidnapping. I don't do any of those things. Have no plans to do it. I guarantee I'll never do it. But it's not because there's a statement on the books saying this is a felony and you're going to get in trouble if you do this, including losing your liberty. So I think it's a distinction worth making. Maybe we're quibbling over words. I mean, it's obviously well rooted in people's use that law is something that legislatures pass and executives sign. So, I'm not going to go to the barricades over the distinction, the semantic distinction, but I think in this conversation it was worth raising. I mean, Hayek, named a trilogy with that distinction in it.
No, I actually think that minute distinctions like this are important. The reason I think so is because if you and I agree basically on the fact that human beings should be free, I want to find the fault line where our views separate. So I've come across this, especially lately, numerous times, the idea that law and legislation are two different things. The way that, in what you just described, what I'm thinking of is the distinction between malum in se and malum prohibita, right? That which is a crime in and of itself, and that which is a crime because the government says so.
Right.
That's the distinction that I would make.
Sure.
But I also don't see what is so sacrosanct about the common law. For instance, when I took my legal classes, it was called judge-made law. Recently, I've seen people call it judge-found law. And the implication is that there was this law out there and these judges found it, that it's actually the natural law that they're applying. But I don't see how judges are superior to a legislation, to legislators when it comes to making law. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I have something to say about that. First of all, I'll recommend a book to you. And I think a lot of the conversation about whether we need a state or not is marked by this lack of knowledge about the deep history of the development of Western law. The book I want to recommend, I don't think the author was a libertarian, but libertarians have for many years talked about this book and quoted it.
Mm-hmm.
It's by Harold J. Berman, the late Harold J. Berman. It's a Harvard University Press book, Law and Revolution, The Formation of the Western Legal Tradition. This is an extremely important book. And what he focuses on in so many ways is the big change that occurs beginning in about the 11th century, the High Middle Ages, pre-Renaissance, with it involves a lot of things like the Catholic Church asserting its authority over the individual, or separation. In other words, making sure there's not political control from the little, prince jurisdictions, kings, and all that. So you have this overarching church in rivalry with the individual kind of governments and the feudal rule and all that stuff, which created zones of liberty. This is extremely important. Not that the church had in mind libertarianism. That's not the point. But the unintended consequence was good, which was good for us, was that this battle over jurisdiction between the king and the pope and the prince and the bishops and all this stuff created zones of liberty. And you get free cities growing up in the 11th and 12th century. You get the law merchant, which is the mercantile law that was almost entirely run in a spontaneous kind of decentralized way by the merchants, merchant fairs, merchant courts. And it was you might look at it and say, hey, that's anarchic. No, there were states, but the states were hemmed in. They were in rivalry with each other. It's a very, I wouldn't call it chaotic, but someone else might look at it and say, yeah, it's pretty chaotic. There wasn't a unified state. So this is very important. This history is very important. This stuff did not come out of a legislature. Capitalism doesn't come after some legislature got together and formulated some theory of individual rights and the right to trade and the right to produce and all that stuff. And then he said, okay, you have the law now, go ahead and be capitalists. Mm-hmm. That's not how history works. So I might have drifted from your question. Remind me of the question, because I want to make this,
I just want to show you this the second
important. This stuff.
So I want to just show something. The second you put that book up there, I wrote this down. I don't know if you can read it.
I saw your writing.
What it says is Iceland, Ireland, Acadia, merchant law, because I thought these might come up.
Of course, it has to come up.
Okay.
And no discussion of anarchism that doesn't talk about this stuff can be satisfactory.
Okay. So in the case of the merchant law, first of all, the law was extremely limited to those that were involved in trade. Secondly, it was in the backdrop of states that would enforce.
I knew you were going to say that.
But it's the truth, though, right?
It's the truth, because there were states, but they were in a sense very limited. Now, do you mean to tell me if there hadn't been states, the merchants? Look, the merchants wouldn't have developed mercantile law anyway. Of course, they would have. Trade is very old; it goes back to pre-ancient times.
Sure,
right?
I don't disagree.
Everybody wants goods.
Sure.
From how far away they come. Merchants make money by bringing goods from location A to location B. They had fairs, these very famous fairs that where people wrote contracts and traded goods. Given all those motives, people want goods. Merchants can make a lot of money by providing those goods over long distances and in sophisticated ways. And by the way, all these sophisticated instruments come up, like even the beginning of the corporation, limited liability partnerships. All this began like 11th century, if not earlier. You mean to tell me, even if there weren't states, the merchants wouldn't have found a way? That just beggars belief. There's no way.
Here's the problem.
No way there would have been no mercantile law except for kings and princes.
No. I'm not saying there couldn't have been any law without kings and princes. What I'm saying is that those laws that you're talking about did, to some extent, rely on the enforcement from the very kings.
Yeah, but I'm saying in the absence of that enforcer, and by the way, you may be overstating how much enforcement, because I don't think they resorted to courts. First of all, they were in a hurry. Very often they didn't allow appeals because everybody was in such a hurry to continue making money, that they said, look, we have a dispute. Let's get this settled real fast so we can move on and make money, get rich. So there wasn't a lot of resort to the state.
Well, okay.
The point is, if there was no state to resort to, obviously they would have found a different way to do it. And a lot of it didn't rely on the state anyway, because the motive was so strong. Oh, I know you asked about the common law. We need to get back.
Yes, we do, but I want
to. The common law has advantage, and nothing's perfect in human affairs, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason why it's worth distinguishing, or according to the common law respect that legislative law shouldn't get, is the common law, first of all, is based on two parties, at least two or more parties, bringing a dispute to a judge, somebody they regard as fair and wise in the area, something like that. Legislation is the result of legislators sitting around in kind of an ivory tower. Maybe they're getting lobbied by people outside, thinking up, here's how I think we should solve a problem. Antitrust law. Let's have antitrust law. Those companies are pretty big. That's not the same as two parties in a dispute going before a wise, fair person they both agree is fair and saying, look, we have a disagreement. I claim I've kept the contract. He claims I haven't kept the contract. We can't resolve this. We don't want to fight, by the way, because fighting's expensive. Plus, you can get hurt and killed, but it's also expensive. Mm-hmm. I'm invoking David Friedman here. So, Mr. Judge, who we pick you because we respect you and think you're fair and know something about the area of law, custom, please sort out this dispute. You don't get that with legislation, right? Two parties in a dispute coming to a legislature. So that right away gives an advantage to common law. Now it's not, obviously it's not going to be perfect. It's people doing it. And so, but that's my initial answer to why we should sort of have some reverence for the common law over legislation. Look, I won't even deny that there was never a case where legislators corrected something in the common law where the common law kind of went off the track and violated rights. It's not impossible that could get corrected by legislation. So I'm not denying that.
No, but the idea that when you say that, for instance, that two parties to a dispute, they go and find a judge that they both, agree is fair and equitable. But in England, these weren't like arbitrators that they were going to. These were court judges, the King's Bench, for instance. These were state actors under the crown that were settling their disputes. And not only that, but in order to enhance liberty in England, they resorted to, for instance, Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, the English Bill of Rights. Sure. And there was also, during this period of time, the king lost his head. You ended up with the Star Chamber, or, religious oppression, that sort of thing. There was it's not as if that because you had common law, you had a situation where basic rights were protected. And in fact, I would argue that the liberties that were achieved in the United States of America were greater than those that were achieved in common law England. And in terms of economic growth, where you talked about earlier, how in the case of the law merchants, they would have gotten to, they would have evolved anyway. But the growth in the United States was far superior to anything the world had ever seen. And that occurred in the legislation.
But the U.S. commercial law and Western commercial law, as it got codified by legislators, was based on the law merchant. That's established.
I don't disagree with that.
Merchant. But let me make one more point here.
Sure.
You said the judges were state officials. But as you'll see, in the Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith talks about the competition in courts. There wasn't just one single court system in England. There were different kinds of courts that had on paper a defined jurisdiction. I don't mean geographical. I mean the area of law, human affairs. But They were rivals. First of all, they made their fees by the cases brought to them. That's how they made money. People brought their cases. So they wanted more cases. And they began to say, like the court over here who did this, had this area, would say, well, you know, we're related to that area, so we can take a case that you think is going to go to that court, because, and everybody was doing that. Smith points this out, and Todd Zwicky has a paper. I forget where it was published, but he's a George Mason law professor. He's a journal article on this sort of thing too. So there's much more competition among courts, and Berman talks about this too, than you seem to think, and that most people seem to think. It was a much more chaotic, and I will say anarchic. Now, it's right. There's a state, but again, it's kind of fragmented. They did make efforts to limit the state through Magna Carta and other things, which was very uneven. Made some progress, but also slipped back. I mean, you know, after the Magna Carta was signed, the Pope excommunicated the barons for that, and the government kind of canceled it, and it wasn't that well observed. But there is a rolling momentum in history, and it's not, you know, there has been progress. So I think you underappreciate how anarchic Western history has been, which gave us these benefits that we enjoy today. The things that you would like to see restored and modern stuff thrown out.
No, it's not underestimating it. I'm pointing out that there was an ultimate enforcer of the law.
Yeah, but I've given you an answer to that. The motive was so strong by concrete people, merchants, customers, and everybody else, and other institutions jealous of their own power, like the church didn't like the little states, the little princes encroaching on their authority to pick bishops and stuff like that. All of this was in contest with each other, which it ended up creating freedom. If the state hadn't been there, that process would have still happened, because merchants wanted to sell and people wanted to buy.
Okay, so that I would say, first of all, it's unknowable what would have happened in the counterfactual.
Because there's too much private activity going on to say that wouldn't have happened.
Sheldon, but okay, in Austrian economics, right? For instance, let me just give you the hypothetical. You don't, a strong argument against the idea of monopoly is that competition doesn't necessarily entail the amount of firms that are competing in a given area or over a given product. That just the knowledge that people have that competitors might enter will allow them or lead them to keep prices low, to not try to do things that are outlandish, that are going to hurt their business. In a similar fashion, all these people that are acting in these areas that you're talking about understand that there's consequences coming from a general state if they don't abide by the rules, the verdicts that they're getting from the judges in whatever circumstance.
I have to object.
You don't think that's true?
I think you're way overstating that. I would invoke what David Friedman talks a lot about, and why different protection companies would recognize each other's rulings and verdicts and things like that because of the repeated dealings.
Okay.
And the merchants understood that if you didn't keep a contract, and it becomes generally known that you don't keep your contract, people won't deal with you. This is in Berman. This is another work on the law merchant. And
I don't disagree with that.
The idea is that all that falls apart if you take the state out of it, I think is just, you can't support that. That's rationalistic.
Well, it's not. It really isn't. No, because we're going. You ultimately, when we're talking about anarcho-capitalism, right? We're talking about something that has never existed. Also, the type of government that I'm advocating has never existed, right? So, in a case where neither thing has never existed, we have to extrapolate from things that have existed, that have taken place, and try to apply them. There's no other way. Now, David Friedman focuses a lot on Iceland. As Arnold Kling and others have pointed out, Iceland was not a libertarian society.
He would agree with that. In fact,
he would.
He says it has a state. But what see, I think you're making a mistake here, and this will relate to the David Friedman example. Because what he says about Iceland is they had a government, they had they had courts, but enforcement was private.
Yes.
So he's pointing to a particular aspect, not saying the whole system is what I'm
No,
looking for.
I
Same is
know.
true. I think the same is true in your case. You say, well, we've never had anarchism, also that we've never had limited government. So, how do we know? But the point is the historical episodes of the Law Merchant, Iceland. I mean, I haven't studied Iceland myself. Some of these other examples, earlier Somalia, and a lot of people have written about that. Those examples are highly suggestive. Were they the entire system that we're hoping for? No. But in very important ways, it shows you what happens when there's not a central government. I'll give you some other examples. Ed Stringham has a book called Private Governance. Ed Stringham is a very sharp, young Austrian economist.
I've had lunch with him.
Yeah, great guy. I say
He's
young.
in Harvard. He's
Maybe
a Trinity.
not so young anymore, but he's younger than I am, so that's young. He has a book about private governance, and part of what he argues in there is, and again, it's a historical book, it's an economic history. What he wants to show is, what he shows there is that when the stock market began to emerge in England and Europe, the government in effect said, this is gambling. We want nothing to do with it. We're not going to guarantee anything. You guys are on your own. And guess what happens? Something like the Law Merchant emerged. Custom, first of all, they all had an end in mind. We want to make money over buying and selling stocks. We don't want to have shootouts. That's not very good for business. And so what emerged was law, customary law, and order in the good sense, not beating heads with batons,
No.
and peace. And
If
so
what you're
without the state, now later the state may get in, but that's a different story. It didn't get in because it needed to get in. It got in because politicians like to rule everything.
Sure.
You know
Sheldon,
that.
but I'm not disagreeing with you that law can evolve. I'm
Okay.
not even denying that good law could
Yeah,
evolve.
but I mean, historically did, not just
No,
not
Sheldon,
theoretically can.
Sheldon, I was just getting ready to say, and has evolved.
Okay.
But I also, so in the case of Ed Stringham, let's just, for instance, and this also complicates these discussions. Ed Stringham doesn't advocate, what he advocates are like communities, anarchic, separate communities that are basically private communities, right? Now, I haven't read up on it. I'm only going by my discussion with him, and this is a discussion that took place 2 years ago. So if I get it wrong, apologies to Professor Stringham. But what I'm wondering, Sheldon, is maybe we're not even speaking of anarchy in meaning the same thing. Do you, for instance, think that individuals, on an individual level, individuals should be free to use retaliatory force? In other words, if I believe Sheldon Richman has robbed me, do I have the right to go retaliate on my own? Does each individual in an anarchic society maintain that right of retaliatory force?
It's a complicated answer. I mean, you have a right to retaliatory force, but if you were to do it without demonstrating to the people around you that this was justified and the other person wasn't in any way, cooperating, you're going to have difficulties there. People not knowing whether you really know this person took your TV. You're saying he took my TV. I'm coming to get my TV, even if I've used force. But there's no demonstration of it. George Smith years ago did a very good article, I think, in the Journal of Libertarian Studies about entrepreneurship and security. And Rainey Barnett, I think, has done some writing on this too. That in order to protect yourself and your reputation, you would want to demonstrate basically to the community that you're justified in retaking your property if the other person isn't cooperating with you. So yeah, do you have a right to your property? You don't lose your property just because someone took it. So yes, you have a right to regain your property.
No. I'm not just talking about that.
It seems to me you'd have to agree with that because you can't delegate your right to retaliation or recovery of property unless you have it. So even if the state is doing it, That doesn't mean you've
Yes.
given it up.
What I what I
We're not Hobbesians here, I think,
no,
right?
let me
You're not a
clarify.
Hobbesian. I'm not a Hobbesian.
No, but let me clarify. Would people in an anarchic society be free to retaliate, to use retaliatory force?
Yeah, but
Would it be? That's what I
they'd
want
be
to know.
free, but they wouldn't be free of the consequences from other people. In other words,
Yeah,
if they
but
call you an aggressor,
that's
you're
part
gonna,
of the
you're gonna get.
problem.
Yeah, but that's why they would do what David Friedman anticipates they would do, and as
Okay.
they did historically. And his great example is his great. And yeah, I know you'll say the state is hovering in the background, but
Well,
the
was it?
example the example I'm going to give it that he gives is the auto insurance industry, right? Auto insurance industries, a lot of them, and a lot of drivers have different companies. And when a crash occurs, chances are good they have different companies. The companies don't go to war. And I'm going to make the additional point. The reason they don't go to war, they already have arbitration agreements in effect. They don't even go to court because the courts stink. I will deny that if you take the state out of that picture, they would be fighting each other. That's nonsense. They would not be fighting each other if you take the state. If the state were to be erased, all state would not be fighting Liberty Mutual or whoever when a crash occurred between their clients, and each is saying it was your fault. No, it was your fault. They would be going to arbitration, and it would be some kind of monetary settlement. They would not go to war if there's no state. Hey, no state around. Good, let's start shooting each other. Rand thought that would happen in 62 or 3 in that one essay. She never revisited it, and I've unfortunately too many official objectivists like ARI types have done nothing but never read anything additional but Rand's 62 or 63 essay.
Okay.
I have here, they pretend, either they're ignorant or they pretend that an incredible scholarship has emerged at least since the 70s.
So I cannot speak, but Sheldon, I'm not here to speak for what anybody's knowledge but my own. What I will say is what you just said is false. Ayn Rand in the essay you're talking about does not say that insurance companies would be fighting each other. That's
no. In effect, she does.
No, she does not. No, she does not. No, not even close.
She said if each had their own, she talked about competing governments, but she meant agencies.
Okay, but there's a difference, Sheldon.
If two people have different companies, and she even said something like, you know what will happen, namely they'll pull out their guns and start shooting.
But who's going to do that? That's the key here. What she's saying is, if you have different agencies that are licensed or have the authority to use force, what they're competing over is the use of force. Then you're going to have that, not that insurance companies.
That's not,
do I have it? I wish I had
it. They're not competing over who.
They're
no individualist libertarian anarchist ever talked about who competing over.
Hold on, if they're defense agencies, correct?
They're not complaining. They're not both claiming a monopoly and then
no.
Hey, I have a monopoly, therefore I'm killing you.
No, but that's not what I said. What I'm saying is that what they're ultimately competing over. First of all, they have the ability and the right in this society to use force. What they're competing over is
yours too.
Yeah, but no, they're not. There's not this competition. But I'm just clarifying her point that these agencies are competing over who best uses force. Who best uses it in defense?
So she was misstating the Rothbard. She was arguing against Rothbard. She was misstating the Rothbard, so that indicts her even further.
No, it doesn't.
I'm a fan of hers. I'm a fan of hers in most ways.
But it doesn't, because what she's saying is Rothbard has a position, right? And what she's saying is this is Rothbard's position. This is what actually occurs under Rothbard's position.
But that's a leap. That's a big leap. This is
well, it's not, because Rothbard's answer ultimately, first of all, Rothbard himself says there has to be that arbitration at some point has to come to an end. He doesn't give the answer of how. There's not a final arbiter, but he does say it has to come to an end.
We know. Look at the Law Merchant.
Okay. Not only that, but Rothbard postulates that all these agencies are going to be governed by libertarian law. which David
Yeah.
Friedman, I think, demonstrates is codswallop, right? That's just not how it's actually going to pan out. The idea that you're
Yeah,
going to have
right. And Friedman supplies the missing link there, and I think he does it. I think he does it well. Uh, but I don't see the problem for the theory. The
okay.
overall
So,
theory.
but here, so this is ultimately the problem. I want to get back to not insurance companies. I want to get to individuals having the right to use retaliatory force.
Yeah.
Right now, I agree that in a capitalist system, in a free country, by and large, I'm Alan Greenspan's essay "Assault on Integrity" comes to mind. That reputation is huge. It matters by and large. But you still, for instance, need prohibitions against murder, theft, robbery, that sort of thing, embezzlement, fraud, because there's people that just don't give a damn about that stuff. Now, if you have a system where each individual is free to use retaliatory force, the only consequence here is that he's going to be shunned by some people. Well, the mafia was shunned, by polite society. They didn't really much care. Street gangs don't really much care if they're shunned by polite society. There's plenty of people that don't care, and now you're in a situation where they can go retaliate, and it's legal to do so. And the only consequence is going to be that polite society is going to shun the people that do this. That doesn't seem to me a strong enough deterrent to stop the madness that results from this.
First of all, that's always a small percentage in a society.
It's a small percentage in a society where there's laws in a state. It's not a small percentage in the society you're talking about.
A lot of that is fueled by things like prohibition, which gives rise to organized crime and stuff like that. Now, there'll always be people who steal and will kill people that get in their way and stuff like that. Sure, but everybody else will have protection agencies, and there's means to deal with that. And somebody who doesn't, as a rule, do that, but just goes out, if he thinks someone stole his TV, just goes out and beats the guy and says, "Give me my TV," without any, just for some reason thinks that's the guy. That person is going to have difficulty dealing with other people. First of all, an action can be brought against him. And if you say, well, what if he just says, "I thumb my nose at your action,"
right?
You don't think there'll be consequences from that?
Okay,
I'm weighing that against the state. The
sure.
state is a monopoly on all of that, and the state has been historically the worst predator ever. And on the other hand, the idea that you can contain the state, and this is where the distinctive objectivist theory, I think, comes into real problems. The idea that you can, when Yaron Brook was debating Brian Kaplan, he kept saying, well, my state, a proper state, he kept over and over again saying a proper state protects rights. Well, that's nice. Okay, so inside your head, you have a proper state. How do you have a proper state on the ground?
Okay.
He said he loves the Constitution, but today's state, he says, is a gang. That was his words. A gang. Yep. A gang. Okay. Let's connect the dots. Spooner comes along and says, either this Constitution authorized that state or it was powerless to prevent it. In either case, it's unfit to exist.
Okay.
He never addressed the idea that, oh yeah, I love this Constitution. Oh,
we're going to get to the state in a second.
Limiting government. On the other hand, we have Leviathan today.
I promise you we're going to get to the state in 1 second. But I just want to say that
you have to compare.
We're going to. But Sheldon, we're going to.
You can't have a singing contest.
Sheldon, I agree.
Where after the first person sings, you say, "You stink, you win."
No, Sheldon, I agree.
Sing.
Sheldon, I agree. But unless we first get to what we're actually talking about, it's a difficult thing to actually have the discussion.
Okay.
But I'll just say that in a case, if Sheldon has a defense agency, I don't. I'm going solo on this. I'm taking the risk. Like the people who don't want health insurance because they say, you know what, I'm not going to get sick anyway. I don't care. I'm saying that I live in a low crime neighborhood. I'm not out there. I'm not, gang banging. The chances of anything happening are very slim. I'm going to go solo. I firmly believe that Sheldon has robbed me. I go back and retaliate. Now, and retaliation isn't just retrieval, it entails punishment as well. So I inflict a punishment on you that I think is reasonable. But you have a defense agency.
Mhm.
Okay. So I've afforded you no due process. You haven't had a trial by jury. You haven't been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just me. But by what right then does your defense agency have to come and attack me or to arrest me if all I'm saying I did was retaliate?
Well, then because most people will look. People's expectations are very important, and they're important to a limited government too, right? If people don't, you have no hope of keeping a government limited if people don't have expectations that the government will remain limited. So there needs to be kind of taboos. The same is true of a stateless society. It presupposes, just like an enduring limited government would presuppose, liberal attitudes. I'm using liberal, in the old sense, our sense, liberal attitudes among most people. And so if people have expectations, this is a point that Kaplan made against Brooke. If people have expectations of peaceful dealings with people and peaceful resolution of disputes, you're more, that's what most people will do. Sure, there'll be outlaws. But people will find ways to deal with outlaws through their protective agency. First of all, most people will want to, because of the division of labor, delegate it. I mean, I don't want to get in a fist fight. I'd rather have a security agency protecting me. So this is what I call a boomerang critique, because it affects the case for limited government as much as it does. But even more so, because you're not setting up a monopoly agency that's proclaiming the right to use force. How often in history has a state which might have started maybe on the benign end of the spectrum quickly accumulate power and become a tyranny? That's an old story, and look at the United States, which was
let's discuss the last best hope. Let's discuss the state. So I'm going to use Lysander Spooner and some of his critiques against the state. One thing that he said is that in his great essay, No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority, is that this is obviously not a government by consent. He says that even at the time of adoption of the Constitution, it wasn't consented to by a majority of the people. Women couldn't vote. Women had no say. A small percentage of the men had a say, and they've got this Constitution, and they basically imposed it on us. And with that came the right to taxation, not the natural right, but I mean the legal right to taxation. So I'm not consenting. Therefore, they're definitely violating my rights, which is something I agree with wholeheartedly on Spooner's part. And Spooner also says, as you said, either this Constitution authorized the type of government we have, or it's powerless to stop it.
And he was writing in the 1870s.
Yes.
Not 2025.
Yes. And what I'm going to say is this, and you are absolutely right. I don't care what constitution you have. I don't care what kind of laws you pass, whether by legislation or judicial precedent. If the people do not want liberty, you are not going to have liberty. And by the people, I'm not saying universally. I'm saying you have to have a generally culturally accepted view that people want liberty. That has to take place in order for you to have limited government, in order for you to have anarcho-capitalism, whatever it is, you have to have that. So now the question is, right? If you have that, that's where the hypothetical has to begin, because that is the assumption we both have to make. If we have that, then I say, if the general people want that, then I say that a limited government that is restricted to protecting rights, resolving contracts, and is funded through voluntary means, whether it be, general contributions, lottery, they could right now sell off all the federal lands would be a good way to start. And also you'd have to understand, and I know you do, that you'd be talking about a much cheaper state to fund when you don't have the military industrial complex, you don't have the welfare system, to pay for, you're talking about a much cheaper thing. My contention is that such a state, given that the people want liberty, would do a much better job of defending the liberty and protecting the rights of the people than would be under an anarchic system.
Yeah. Well, I disagree with like a lot of that.
Well, go ahead.
I'm trying to think. There was something at the beginning of that I was going to take issue with, but I'll start at the end because I can't think of that right now. I like the line by David Friedman. See, I think David Friedman has, and he's been doing this for many years, it's nothing new, has provided what I called it the missing link. The problem with Rothbard is, even if he came up with the perfect libertarian law code, and leave that aside whether it's a perfect, but let's assume he did. Let's say somebody else did. Joe Schmo did. How does it can't just be a gentle rain on society, right? The knowledge, and therefore we'll all turn into libertarians, whatever your conception is, right? That's not how life works, right? There's not in every town under the old oak tree in the middle of town. There's not going to be somebody reading from the treatise, and then after that, everyone says, "Okay, now we all understand one law, one libertarian law, everything." David has provided the missing link through the idea that it's going to be bilateral bargaining. People are going to be writing contracts. Contracts is private law. If you and I write a contract with each other, that's our law. It doesn't affect third parties, but it's our law. So the idea, now I lost my train of thought. Why did I do that? So David Friedman's point is, you said the limited government where most people are, the culture is liberal. Let's put it that way, meaning most people. And I agreed. I said that before you said it. I said we both agree on that. David Friedman said, so you said the limited government in that situation is going to be superior to anarcho-capitalism in protecting rights, because some people will violate rights. It's true. Or there's going to be misunderstanding about contracts. Doesn't have to be malicious. So we'll agree with that. David says everybody agrees that governments stink at making shoes and cars. Law is much more complicated than shoes and cars. So why in the world do you think government would be good at making law? In other words, law is not made for the broad outlines about individual rights. We may have a very good idea of, and I think we do, but that doesn't mean law in the sense of the more particular things, and this is where disputes come in. That's very complicated, and new things arise, which will then need to be where people with new disputes, meaning new needs for adjudication or conflict resolution. The government will stink at that. For the same reason it stinks at making cars and shoes, except law is even more complicated. I think David, and you can find lectures of his where he goes through this, full lectures like at Cato and other places. If you look on YouTube, you'll find them, or you can read the free PDF of Machinery of Freedom. I think that's a terribly sophisticated thing. Now, he's not making a moral argument.
No.
He will say, look, I have no guarantee you're going to get kind of libertarian law out of this, right? David, he's very modest. I can't guarantee that. But of course, no advocate of limited government can guarantee it either. When Yaron was pressed on this point by Kaplan, he said, but it will strive for a guarantee. And my answer and Kaplan's answer to that was, a striven for guarantee is not a guarantee. Sorry. If I go to Best Buy and buy a computer and I say, is this guaranteed? And they say, well, we'll strive for a guarantee. I say, buy.
No, yeah, I get it. But
somewhere else.
But Yaron's position is not my position.
Okay. All right.
Right. So
I needed to hear that then.
No, that's fine.
That's fine.
But okay, so I happen to agree that's a good point on Friedman's part, that government may, there's no, why would you assume it would be good at making law? Well, okay, I don't disagree, but the laws will be far simpler than what they are now. I mean, right now, the tax code, like nobody even knows everything that's in it. It's this wide. The criminal code is huge. There's all types of unnecessary stuff. So it would be a far simpler thing. But the question to me isn't just about the making of the law. It's the enforcing of the law. So this is this, to me, the strongest argument that has ever been made against objectivists when it comes to anarchy is the Roy Childs argument. So Roy Childs argued that objectivism implies anarchy. That I know there's people watching that are going to say yes, but he later recanted. Yeah, I know he did, but that's not really relevant.
Well, we don't even know. We don't really know.
We don't know why
that he recanted.
No, I've read where he actually said,
he never wrote down a refutation.
No, but he did. He said, I'm no longer an anarchist.
Yeah, but he never told anybody. He talked to me even.
Yeah,
but didn't give anybody, even his closest friends, a hint, a strong hint about what his argument was.
No, all he said is he was no longer an anarchist.
So, yeah, well, maybe.
Well, I have that in his book, Liberty Against Power. So I know it. I mean, that's an easily provable thing. But anyways, his argument was that by the objectivist position that you can't initiate force, that an objectivist government, no matter how good, could not stop defense agencies from coming into being, because to do so would be to initiate force against them. Now, I disagree with him on that, and that this is, I think, a good place to start, be a good avenue to go down. First of all, I personally think, and Stephan Kinsella mocked me. Oh, he says it's too risky. That's actually not what I said. What I said in the hypothetical was, if you had a government that was specifically limited to protecting individual rights, did not tax, so it was funded completely voluntarily, and then you had a defense agencies that could assert equal jurisdiction, that would create such a risk of violating the stable order of rights protection that it would justify stopping it from happening. In a similar way that if you had a collector that wanted to buy a nuclear weapon, although he assured everybody he wasn't going to use it, it would be right to ban somebody from owning a nuclear weapon. It would be perfectly legitimate to pass laws against people driving while intoxicated, because the risk of them violating somebody else's rights is so high that it justifies it. Now, that was the argument that I made, but I've since even moved beyond that. And here's why. And there's a few hypotheticals that I want to run through. Okay. The first one is this. If we have a government, and I live in Connecticut, so let's just take Connecticut, and the government is strictly limited to protecting rights. The culture in Connecticut is such that we've adopted liberty. Most people want it. We don't want people passing laws to confiscate our wealth, to stop us from taking drugs, whatever we want. So the government here is limited to just that. Sheldon and you and me are citizens in this state. Now you say, you know what? I don't care for this. I think I could do a better job at protecting rights than the existing government. So you go out and you start Sheldon's Defense Agency. Let's say Carlos, my friend that I went to the Soho Forum with, one of my friends that I went with, Carlos comes to you and hires you as his defense agency. Now, Carlos comes to you with a report. Carlos says, Mike has robbed me. Mike has put a gun to me and robbed me and taken my stuff. So now Carlos goes to you and he makes this report. You go to the government and attempt to arbitrate and say, listen, we have a situation here where one of my guys says one of your guys robbed him. We want to arrest and try your guy. The government says, no way. Look, we will take him. We will try him. Carlos can testify as a witness. And if found guilty, he will be punished according to the law. You say as a defense agency, no, we have a right to assert jurisdiction here. We're going to handle this. You come and arrest me so that you can try me. I say, listen, you're initiating force against me. You're assuming I did this. You've apprehended me. I call my government. They come, they get me back, and they arrest you. Now, who in that scenario has initiated force?
Okay, let me back up a second. First of all, the idea of a government, which means monopoly, without the power to tax is a floating abstraction, to use a Rand term. I can in no way even imagine a government that will enforce a monopoly without a power to tax? What if nobody gives it any money? Rand says that under capitalism, all property, this is a verbatim quote, I believe, all property is privately owned. So the government is what, hovering in the air? I mean, doesn't it have offices, or does it have to rent? But where's it get the money? What if nobody, how do we know which is the government? What if nobody gives, what if, everybody says, okay, they're saying they're the government, but I'm not giving them any money. And so they gave their money to other, in other words, you have sort of a divine, you'll deny this, of course. And I don't quite mean it literally. You almost have a divine theory of the state. Which is the government? If people want to offer services, and maybe they want to use the same procedures, maybe they want to use Western procedures about evidence, presumption of innocence, etc. They're not risky. They're saying, hey, we use the same procedures as you do. Where's the risk? Because, by the way, to compare risk of that to risk of nuclear wars, nuclear weapons, that's
no.
That's a foul. That's a foul.
I'm Sheldon. I'm identifying a principle.
No,
right?
but you're
and principles exist on a continuum.
You're equivocating on the word risk.
No, I'm really not.
To have a nuclear weapon that can't even be targeted against an aggressor.
Okay, a bazooka.
General destruction to an agency which may be mimicking the state's own procedures. How is that risky? You're using kind of a.
I'm going to tell. We're going to get to that, but Sheldon, we're going to get to that. Why it's risky. I promise you.
But your whole example seems to be riddled with problems.
Okay, well, let's see.
Who is the government?
Well, I'll tell you. So right now we have a government in the United States of America, and we have a constitution.
We certainly do.
Okay, so to get from there to where I want to be, it requires, as you already said, that the culture has to adopt liberty. So we in that situation, we already have a geographic area designated as the United States of America. There's already a government in place. We're not in a state of nature.
There are 50 governments in place.
Yeah, yes, sure.
With a lot of disagreement in law and stuff.
Sure. We'll get to get to all
QED.
No, not QED, and we'll get to why not.
World government.
No,
you're committed to world government.
No, that is such a straw man, and we can get to that.
No, it isn't.
It is, but you're jumping way ahead. You've made a point, and now I want to respond, and then you make three more points.
Well, object makes me jump ahead. Sorry.
Okay, but so the case of the floating abstraction. We already know what a government is. A government is an organization with a monopoly on retaliatory force in a given geographic area. We already have that. We have the United States government.
Can I break in here? Yeah, but that government that we have today is riding on a whole history of illegitimate moves.
I don't disagree.
This is the point I wanted to make before. Even because when you mentioned Spooner, even going back to the Constitutional Convention, that was a coup.
I know what it was, Sheldon.
Hang on a second. Yeah, but your viewers may want.
Sheldon, listen, but we yes, under the Articles of Confederation, it had to be all states had to agree. Under the Constitution, I believe they made it 9. Also, they
changed the rules once they got to Philadelphia.
Yes,
that was
also,
a coup.
Yes, it was. I don't disagree with any of that. And if you want to get to that afterwards, or we can get to Rothbard's solution, we can do all of that. It's fine. But I can only handle one objection at a time.
I know, but you're piling in so much stuff.
No, I'm really not.
Also, forget about it.
Yeah. So in the case of the idea of a floating abstraction, we know what a government already is. It's a monopoly of force in a given geographic area, which we have. We have a United States federal government, which has federal authority, and then we have 50 state governments, which have authority in their domain. They have jurisdiction over each jurisdiction is set, each is limited, right? So we already have that. So now the idea is if the culture adopts liberty, we have to whittle that down. The idea that if the general culture accepts liberty, that people are not going to fund the government that protects their rights, to me, it just doesn't make sense. Well, then why would they fund defense agencies? I mean, you run into the same problem. Yes, but we've already postulated, we've already agreed that the general culture has to accept these ideals. Until you have that, the discussion is moot. It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. There's nothing that we can do. So in this case I'm talking about, if we were to talk about a government and we were to come up with different ideas of how to fund the government, right? Through different types of taxation, whatever. Some may have happened, some may never have happened. We may propose a government structure that's never occurred. These aren't floating abstractions because we know what the general idea of government is. A government is simply a monopoly on force in a geographic area. It is irrelevant how that government is funded. Irrelevant. So again, and we can get to all the constitutional stuff you want to in the one world government, all that stuff. But again, I just want an answer. In this hypothetical I gave you, who has initiated force?
Well, it depends on whether the guy making the claim is right, which is why he's going to want to bring it before a forum to demonstrate to the community that he's justified in retaking his property if the thief doesn't return it.
Okay, but in order to do any of that, you have to have some sort of jurisdiction over somebody who has not been convicted of a crime yet.
Well, I mean,
he's been accused.
I have a right to accuse somebody. I have a right to accuse somebody. Of taking my TV.
Yeah. Okay.
And Friedman uses this as a very example, right? And the guy says, "I didn't take your TV.
Yeah.
I bought this at Best Buy, 3 weeks ago."
Yep.
Well, I'm presuming that most people in that situation aren't going to want to fight. They'll go to their agency and they'll work it out. And then the guy will say, "Here's my receipt. Here's the CCTV from Best Buy showing me at the
Sheldon,
counter buying."
I'm not talking about a TV. I'm talking about an armed robbery where someone's taken somebody's money.
Oh, well,
so what I want to know is who in this scenario that I gave you, which is not a far-fetched scenario. If you've got competing defense agencies in a given geographic area, one person accuses another. In the scenario I gave you, there's already a government in place. Who initiated force in that scenario?
Well, I don't know. I don't think I know enough details, but why does the state have a right to? Why does the state have a right to do anything?
Hold on. This is the entire point that I'm making. Is you don't have enough details yet.
That's why people will go to their agencies who've already have agreements to go to arbitration. Have already picked an arbitration,
and you want to talk about floating abstractions?
It'll be
seriously, Sheldon.
That's not a floating abstraction. It happens in auto insurance every day of the week.
With the state hanging over their head, Sheldon.
You were positing that if the government would disappear tomorrow, all the insurance agencies would begin shooting at each other.
No, I'm not. No, that's not what I'm. No, it's not. That's a ridiculous straw man that I've never said, never implied.
It was just in your previous statement. The state is there in the background.
because
that's my point.
Because contracts are able to be enforced.
Don't say
it is a straw man
when you just said it.
No, because it's not insurance companies that are going to be out there shooting each other, but insurance companies,
protection agencies,
but Sheldon, any organization, any crime right now that's committed anywhere, there's a government that has jurisdiction. I'm talking about in America that has jurisdiction over that area, and people know where to go to resolve it. That exists right now. I gave you an example, and this was just at the beginning. This wasn't with millions and millions of people involved. It's one example that you have a government already in place, and this occurs. And in that one example, you can't tell me you initiated force. Now you're telling me when you multiply that.
I see that in a lot more detail.
Yes.
If the guy stole his TV, then he initiated force.
But Sheldon, this is the entire point. That in order but Sheldon, in order to find out the truth requires standards. It requires things like investigation, due process. It requires all kinds of antecedents that go into proving it.
Standards, law merchant,
but in this specific case that I gave you, in this specific case that I gave you, which if you were to have competing governments, I'm talking about with the Roy Childs hypothetical, that the existing government couldn't prevent the other one from asserting jurisdiction. What I'm saying is that
representing its client. You talk about asserting jurisdiction.
Yes.
It's kind of a fancy, let's get it down to earth. representing the client, and it's not going to, by and large, is not going to want to engage in violence because it's bad business.
Hold on. That organization, in order to get justice for its client, necessarily has to use force.
No, disagree.
They don't. So
No.
so then what's my deterrent from robbing him?
No, maybe after the process has gone through, and if the person refuses to help, to cooperate.
I refuse to submit to that process.
But the government is not some sort of divinely endowed organization.
I'm not saying it is. All I'm saying is that.
But the government will be violating rights all the time by your own standards.
No, it would not. We can get to that in a minute.
It doesn't have the halo around it.
No. This is all. Hold on. These are all straw man libertarian arguments.
I don't think so.
That are made over and over again. What I'm saying is that, this is the gist of it. In order to have freedom, you need to have law that's knowable to everybody involved so that they know whether they're breaking the law or not. It has to be knowable to everybody. You also have to have procedures in place that people necessarily have to go
law
through.
Merchant. Everybody knew. Everybody knew because it's based on expectations.
Yeah.
So yes,
in law merchant, like I already said, they relied on states to enforce it.
Well, then don't tell me that you're not saying that if the government disappeared tomorrow, insurance companies would be fighting it out in the streets. Don't tell me.
I'm not saying that.
It's
not. No,
it's
Sheldon, that's not what I'm saying.
Said a moment ago.
No, it's
every
not.
time you say the government was there.
It was. What it means,
then you're
Sheldon,
saying if you take it away,
they'll
be shooting out.
No, it does not. It does not mean that. What it means is that people would be less likely to even enter into contracts to begin with. No, what it means is that you would have criminals would be ascendant. It doesn't mean that now law-abiding people would start shooting each other. The point I'm making, again, is that in order to have liberty, you have to have procedures in place, and in order to find, and you need to have a final arbiter so that the thing can be concluded.
Well, history refutes that. You don't need a state to get procedures.
Sheldon, I gave you a simple verdicts. Sheldon, I gave you a simple example of two people involved, one defense agency, one government, and we couldn't even find out who initiated
the defense agency will negotiate with the government if the government's willing to, because
the government's not willing to.
It's not anymore. It can't tax. It's just
the government is not willing to. The government is not willing to. Okay, so unless the government agrees to allow somebody else to try one of their citizens for a crime committed in the jurisdiction that they've already been governing.
One of their citizens. See how you're giving the halo to this?
It's not a halo.
The state,
it's not a halo.
By your mission, can't even tax.
It's not a halo.
It's just another agency.
Okay, call it an agency. Don't care. It's an agency. Why is
it special? Why is it special?
Because it already exists and already has a monopoly on force and is already protecting rights.
But it doesn't exist as a monopoly.
In the hypothetical,
there's a rival agency that's selling services.
Okay, so but that's precisely Roy Child's point, is that it would not be justified in stopping that. And what I'm arguing is it's justified in stopping it because it necessarily renders rights insecure because you don't know who's committed force.
It might be justified in stopping in a particular case, stopping it from going to recover this TV, but stopping it from existing as an agency, no. Those are
I didn't say. Hold on. I never said it did. I've never once said that you could not open. What I'm saying,
an agency can exist.
I know what I'm saying is that an agency cannot exist that can assert jurisdiction in a given geographic area.
You're denying the existence to
No, I'm not exactly. You could have a protection agency. You can have bodyguards, private security. You can even enter into private arrangements with other people, private contracts, and agree to arbitration. You can do all of that. What you cannot do is assert jurisdiction to use force in a given geographic area that is already governed by an agency, a government, whatever you want to call it, that is limited. That is okay. It's got a halo and it's limited to protecting.
God has appointed it.
Well, then Roy Childs ultimately appointed it, not Mike Liebowitz. Roy Childs gave the example that damn near every libertarian anarchist I've ever argued about goes to. They go to that Roy Childs was right. That government would not be justified in preventing jurisdiction from another agency. I'm saying it would be. And then you say, well, then that government has a halo.
It wouldn't.
But then Roy Childs was
You
wrong.
wouldn't be able to prohibit companies from forming to offer protection services and deal with and make agreements with other companies to that if we have a conflict, we go to this arbitration. In other words, the Friedman story. I mean, he didn't cite Friedman, but basically he's saying if a Friedman system was growing up where there was also a gang that was claiming to be the government, if it shut down those agencies, then it would be aggressive.
Okay.
It either loses its monopoly or it becomes an aggressor by shutting down the agencies. That's Child's argument.
Again, you can have protection agencies, you can have defense, you can have bodyguards, you can have whatever all that stuff, have it. What you cannot have, what the state would be perfectly just in stopping, is from one of your agencies asserting jurisdiction in this geographic area.
That wouldn't be just. I don't know what you mean by asserting jurisdiction. That sounds too political.
I already told you what I meant by asserting jurisdiction. It's not. It's very simple. In the case that I gave you, where you have a client who comes to you and has accused me of robbing him, if you come and assert the jurisdiction to arrest and try me, which is what jurisdiction means, the government that is already in place, that is committed to protecting rights, has the right to stop it. That full stop.
Well, I don't see where it gets the right.
It gets the right because if it's already,
that doesn't apply to anybody else. That no one else has.
Hold on. I'm going to say the reason it has the right, or the reason it's just in behaving this way, is because it's already committed to protecting rights, and to allow a situation where you can come and arrest me and try me would necessarily render my rights insecure. That's why.
Well, my agency goes to your agency, and we already have an agreement, and we begin the process to determine whether my accusation that you took my money or my TV or my wallet is true or not.
Hold on.
The government, the thing that's calling itself the government should butt out.
Why should it butt out?
Because
I've already been paying it. It protects me.
We have already agreed that that if you
have a dispute, I haven't agreed to any of it.
Right. Then
I'm being accused of a crime.
Then I can demonstrate to the community in that with you not there that you indeed did take my television and
no, that I robbed Carlos. Carlos is making the accusation. Okay, what community are you going to demonstrate this to?
Well, just the people around. That if you don't give my property back, then since I have the right to take it back, I would want people to realize what I'm doing is legitimate.
But we don't even know yet that I've taken the property.
Well, there's going to be a process.
There's an accusation.
A trial. I said a trial with you. If you're welcome to show up, if you don't show up, I can still present the evidence.
Okay, so you're going to try me in abstention.
Because there's nobody with a halo. There's no agency with a
nobody
halo.
said there was a halo. Okay.
Yeah, but you talk about the government as if it has a halo.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about the government. No, I'm talking about a government that already exists, consists of human beings, that has a monopoly on force in a geographic area that is limited to protecting rights.
It has a monopoly on force.
Where did it doesn't ultimately it doesn't matter where it got it. No, it ultimately doesn't matter. That in this is you mentioned. Hold on.
We have a monopoly on force.
No, it didn't. First of all, it didn't just declare it; it already has it now. So to get from where we are to where I want to go, okay, that's fine. But it's still there. It still has it. Yeah, and as Randy Barnett writes, you brought up Randy Barnett, that if the government is limited to protecting force, you don't have to consent to it. In the same way that you don't have to consent. If you punch me in my face, you don't have to consent to getting arrested.
I would say to Barnett, you don't have to consent. It was getting back to my distinction between law and legislation. The law or legislation, whatever you want to say, whatever you want to call it, in both cases, against murder is binding on you, independent of your consent. I totally agree with that. You don't need to consent to anybody before the rules against murder, theft, and all that stuff, the common law crimes. That does not require consent. So I agree. But the government, I don't see how the government can operate if you don't. The government requires consent if it's going to operate. First of all, it needs money, and you're saying you can't even tax.
Well, it does. It needs money, but it doesn't need money from every person that lives in that area.
But that institution requires consent, not some of its decrees that happen to coincide with.
It doesn't require. It does not require consent from everybody. No, I would disagree.
The monopoly requires consent. It requires consent to be the monopoly.
No, I would disagree. But
okay, how does it get a monopoly status?
Well, it's got its monopoly status. First of all, like I said, the thing already exists. And now if we were able to establish the type of culture.
You're like the magician who we see putting the rabbit in the hat.
How? What difference does it make?
By saying what you just said.
No, I'm not, because you've agreed with me that the only way to get from here to there is to change the culture. That's the only way. If the culture changes, the government that's currently in existence gets whittled down, and all it does is protect.
Maybe that's just a way station to free market anarchy. Order anarchy.
Okay, well, that's fine. And what I'm saying is that way station stops with the government that doesn't tax.
Well, there's no reason why it should. First of all, it can't tax.
Okay, so I've already given you one example. So I'll give you another example. In an anarchic society, right? Anarcho-capitalism, where you have competing defense agencies, you have two teenagers. One's 18, one's 17.
I know. We're going to do this now. Age of consent.
So
you realize that states of the union have different ages of consent?
Yes, I do.
Do they go to war?
Again,
countries have different ages of consent. Do they go to war?
Sheldon, this is why every single libertarian brings that up. The problem is this.
Well, no kidding.
But it doesn't follow, because in the United States of America, the different states have boundaries. So when you're in Connecticut, this is the age of consent. When you go to New York, this is the age of consent. When you're in California, this is the age of consent. When you're in a different country, well, here's the thing. I hired a defense agency that says that my 17-year-old daughter cannot consent. Joey's parents have one that says 16-year-olds can consent. My daughter has sex with Joey. In my mind, and according to my agency, my daughter's been raped.
Your agencies will work it out. There'll be side payments.
Oh my
Friedman
God!
gives the example of disagreement over whether there should be capital punishment.
They're going to hold on. So they're going to work out whether my daughter's been raped.
That's what they're
going to work out.
Rape, you mean statutory rape? She's not saying she was raped. She had sex against her will.
But this
sounds like an intra-family dispute.
Okay, the problem
she
is
wants to have sex. Her father doesn't want.
Yes, that's fine. Yes,
the
problem is. You have the defense agency that I've hired, these defense agencies that are very efficient and very good at serving their customer. That's what they're good at.
But they won't go to war.
Okay. Well, what I want them to do is protect my daughter from having sex with somebody over 18.
They won't go to war.
Why?
They'll say, keep your daughter locked up.
Hold on a second. That's what they're going to say? Really?
Probably, because we're not going to war.
Really? So then my defense agency, that's fine. So my defense agency, which I've hired to protect my rights and the rights of my family, is now not going to protect the rights of my daughter.
Your company will do, first of all, already be something in the contract about that stuff. Go to arbitration.
Right. Again, in my contract
the culture is liberal, so people will not be expecting war every time there's a dispute.
No, but in my contract is going to be Loctite. That my daughter cannot have sex with somebody over 18. That's what I want. And I want the agency that's going to provide me with
if the daughter wants to have sex with you.
Even if the daughter wants to have sex, I'm saying that there's already laws like that. So, I mean, they already exist. It's not so far-fetched that I could find an agency that would do that. And
this is why you want the state, which obligates you to a world government.
No, it does not. Again, it doesn't. That's a straw man. And it's an incredible one.
States which have different ages of consent. There can still be a dispute where a father says,
Yeah,
My my
but you know
daughter.
who has jurisdiction, Sheldon.
Yeah, but again, we're back to the God
No, we're
endowment.
not, because we already know in those cases, whether God or Sheldon or Lysander Spooner has designated it. We
Hmm.
already know in those situations which laws, which state has jurisdiction. In the case I'm proposing to you, there's no way to know who has jurisdiction, and that's the problem.
Well, I would
And that's
refer
just
to it.
one thing.
I
That's
would refer
one
to
thing, mind
I
you.
would refer to David Friedman
He
to
had
find
no answer either. I
like
asked him the same
no,
question.
but he
No
has
answer.
the example he used is where one some people want a deal with their protection agency that if they're murdered, the murderer will be executed. And then there are other people that don't believe in capital punishment, so they patronize companies that say, if I'm murdered, I don't want capital punishment. I don't believe in capital punishment. And
Yeah.
then you have disputes. And he gives an account of how, given that people don't generally want to go to war with each other, especially
Hold
the
on.
businesses don't
Hold
want
on a
to,
second.
they will work that
Wait a
out
second.
through
Wait,
side
wait.
payments and
First
various
of
things.
all, the
That's a
idea
better
that
alternative
people
than a
hold
monopoly
on.
state, which we know will
Wait.
abuse its people, eventually abuse its people,
We
because
we
it
don't
does.
know any such thing because
It
you've
does.
already
It has throughout
conceded.
history. Come on, we're
Hold on.
empiricists. We're inductivists, right?
We are. And as empiricists, when have we ever had a culture dominated by a desire for liberty, which you already
Yeah,
agreed
but
is
it's
necessary
not.
to establish
You
this?
can't just find a moment where it's desired. It's got to be enduring, and
It has to.
people will always be
Yes.
tempted to get something for nothing by going to
Yes.
the state.
Right.
You
And
need
we
to
all
guard
that's
against
why
that. If
that's
you can't,
why of course you
that
do. But anarchy doesn't do that any better than a limited
yes, it
state.
does, because there's no state.
No, it doesn't,
There's no
because I could
monopoly.
still
There's
go
no
higher.
monopolies. You can't go
What
to the state and say, "Give me subsidies," steal money from other people to give to me.
No,
There's no state.
no. What I can do is hire a defense agency, though, that because I don't want drugs being sold in my community, I
Yeah,
can
but
go hire a defense agency that's going to enforce that.
look,
I can go hire a defense agency
if
that's
you
going to
went door
enforce
to
the death
door,
penalty.
if we didn't have a government, let's say we didn't have a war on drugs, assuming the government still stayed there, but there's no war regarding drugs.
Yeah.
If you went door to door saying, with your tin can, saying you want to kick in the donation, I'm going to stamp out heroin use. Want to help me out? I have a feeling there'd be a free rider, not problem, a free rider blessing, and people would say, "No, I don't want to give." In other words, if it's out of their own pocket, they're not going to do it. As Friedman points out,
They
people are
already
willing.
do it.
People are.
They already do it.
They don't voluntarily do it.
What? What percentage of
The
Americans do you
war, the
think is,
war against drug users is financed by taxation.
yeah, by people that vote for the politicians that
Oh, they
put in the
vote. Yeah, they vote for it
taxation?
because it's going to take from everybody else, and they'll pay a little bit. That's it.
Some people pay. Plenty of people are willing to
Yeah.
pay for it. And in the situation you're talking about, you wouldn't even need a lot of people that were
If there
willing
was
to
not
pay for it.
compulsory taxation, you wouldn't be raising money for a war on drugs.
How,
Because more,
okay,
as Friedman points out, people are going to tend to be willing to pay more to protect their rights or their lives
Sheldon,
than they're going to be willing to pay to meddle in other people's lives.
Sheldon, some people,
Most
some
people,
people,
most.
but that doesn't stop there from being a large enough contingent that will pay for it.
I doubt it.
Okay, you doubt it.
Because they bear the full consequences of the payment, and only a very tiny bit of the benefits. This is one of Friedman's points about why
No,
government is
well,
so bad.
hold on.
You
Benefit.
don't benefit. You get only a slim amount of benefits, if there
Wait a
are
second.
benefits, and you
Hold
only
on.
pay a small amount of the cost
Wait
of
a
the overall
second.
cost.
The benefits that people believe they're getting or what they consider a benefit differ. So to say they're only going to be getting a small benefit, well, you don't know how that person's interpreting that benefit. The person may think it's a great benefit and willing
Yeah,
to
but
pay
they
a
have
ton
limited
for it.
resources and many things they want to spend their money on. So
Yeah,
we can make pretty
you
safe,
cannot.
generally safe predictions
But the
about
point
what people are
is,
going to do.
we've strayed. The initial point was that there's no way to know that you're going to resolve the situation that I gave you. And these are, by the way, these disagreements can happen among people who generally agree. The same as the death penalty. People that are committed to liberty can differ over that. What about intellectual property? Are you telling me that Stefan Kinsella is ever going to sign up with a defense agency that's going to compromise on that issue?
Well, as Friedman points out, we're going to, especially given the internet and everything, that's fading away. And it's not enforceable, and it'll go away.
Well, there's
It'll take
still
care of itself. Let's put it that way.
okay. Well, there right now there's still laws against IP violations. There's still trademark, copyright, patents right now, and there's no universally accepted
People
position.
will work it out, especially as you say, if the
Will
liberal
they?
culture has expectation and the people have expectations of peaceful resolution, then they'll
Yeah.
work things out.
Yeah. Property rights, intellectual property rights to me are as sacrosanct as if you stole my computer.
Okay, that's a different.
No,
we're moving
because
into a different debate.
we aren't though.
What I
because here's-
said was I made a meta point. They'll work it out because
Yeah,
the
and-
expectation is we settle the disputes.
Why do you assume? How do we? So
They're
would
not
they
going to
work
turn to the gun. By your own assumption, they're not going to turn to the
by
gun.
my own assumption? If somebody steals my intellectual property, my agency damn well better resort to a gun. If the person that has violated my rights won't return my money,
Well,
and
you may have a hard time
compensate
getting a
me?
company. You may have a hard time getting a company.
Oh, I don't think I would.
We're not going to
Because
war. We're not
they're
going to war.
going to
We will
do the
settle
best.
things.
They're
will
going
settle
to do
things
the
through-
best, Sheldon.
We will settle things through arbitration.
Hold on. The hypothetical always is that these agencies are going to do their best to serve their clients. You have a lot of people out there
Within
for
good
whom
business practices,
intellectual
which is to avoid
property is
war,
very important.
which is to avoid war.
Okay,
Well, they're not
so
going to
then,
fight wars over it.
well, I don't understand why
You
if
got to
people
pay
write,
people hazardous pay. It's expensive, very expensive. Your employees are going to want more money.
you have a volunteer army right now where people agree to go fight wars that their government started that do no benefit to
That's
them.
got the mystique of the state, which is another thing we haven't added. The state has accumulated over history a mystique which is very damaging to individual liberty, because people say, "Oh, the state," and you to some extent have done that. That's what I mean by the halo. Oh, it's the state. That's different from everything else because of the ideology which
It's
we're
not.
trying to defeat.
It's not, but we're not in a state of nature. We're simply not.
I didn't say anything about the state.
No, but that's why I'm not putting a halo on it. I remember reading in Omnipotent Government in von Mises talks about that a lot of the current property relations, if you trace them back, they're unjust. But it just doesn't make sense to upend them all. It just doesn't make sense to do it. Rothbard's idea that we're going to upend every unjust property relation is absolutely absurd. Because you could go back 300 years and find out.
I don't know that Rothbard says we're going to upend every.
And he said, if you can find the original owner, then you give it to his
not
descendants.
after a certain amount of time. Well, first of all, the original owner. Are you saying a living original owner?
No. Rothbard. We're going to go a little too far afield with this. But my point is only that
remediation is a whole big subject in itself, and I don't have.
Yeah,
I don't have any kind of
my
finished
ultimate point is that we're not in a state of nature. We have a government, we have a constitution that could. Now, look, what I'm advocating and what you're advocating are so far off in the future. Let me, I'm not, I'm not this guy that's saying, oh, what we got to do is, like, you have this young group of anarchists out there now who think you're just going to go, you're going to convince people, the philosophers are going to come in and you got anarchy. I mean, that's just, codswallop. But we do have a government, we do have a constitution, we do have designated geographic areas, however they came about. So now, to me, what we want to do is, how do we, with what is given, what we have, establish the best framework for individual liberty? Okay, Sheldon, it's been an hour and a half, and I do have to go. But listen, I'll let you give a final statement, and you can, if it's got to be 20 minutes, make it 20 minutes. I don't care. But I'm certainly willing, though, to have you on again to
You're a formidable interlocutor, not debater, not debate partner, because this was not a debate, folks.
No, it's a discussion.
I just want to say for the viewers, and I'm not.
Okay, go ahead.
This doesn't mean it's directed at you, Michael, but too much of the debate from the limited government side, and the Ayn Rand Institute is primarily where I see this, because that's pretty much what I see on this debate. Doesn't seem to understand, or pretends that this is not a fact, that there has been a very important scholarship going for the past 50 years. I'm not talking about the 19th century, Benjamin Tucker, people like that. There's important stuff there, but I'm just bringing it up, maybe make it a little more relevant to us. Rothbard, but then really picking up in the 70s, especially when Nozick writes his Anarchy, State, and Utopia, with the first section of which, Anarchy, was in an attempted refutation of Rothbard, which of course got responded to by a whole bunch of libertarians. My point is, it's a very, since the 70s, there's been a huge library amassed, literature, written by scholars, many of them academics, but some of them independent. George Smith, for example, was not at a university, but economists, economic historians, regular historians, sociologists, all kinds of stuff. A small sample from my own library, and don't think for a minute my library, which is pretty modest, is an anarchist library. I got books on all kinds of things. This is just a sample. I mentioned Law and Revolution, very important. It's been a lively debate. In other words, if you're going to respond, and this I can refer you, I can direct this to you too. Anybody who's going to systematically respond to this argument for statelessness can't just keep it in the realm of theory. They have to refer to history and the points made by these scholars repeatedly over the years. We mentioned Ed Stringham. Where's his book? Anarchy and the Law. Now, this is like 40 papers, pro and con, by the way. People attacking, like Tyler Cowen, attacking Friedman, criticizing Kaplan and Stringham and other people about whether the agencies would consolidate, cartelize, and become a state and become a tyrannical state. Very lively debate. Stringham put together 40 papers, including the responses to Nozick. In other words, what I'm saying is you can't just do this as chess in your head, a chess game in your head, right? We are inductivists, at least you and I are. We believe in looking at reality and then using reason, drawing generalizations from what we observe. And history is long enough, certainly going back to the 11th century, but even earlier, that we have a pretty good sample of what people did. And so maybe we're wrong. I can allow for that. And as you say, maybe if the state weren't hovering in the background, none of that would have happened. It would have been total chaos and violence and everything. I deny that, but let's say, maybe you're right about that. The point is, you can't engage in this argument without familiarizing yourself with this at least 50 years of literature. It's extremely serious, depth, it's deep, comes from a variety of disciplines. I get the feeling when you listen to like ARI people, the way they dismiss it, and it's not.
You're going to drive me crazy with ARI.
It's not any deeper than Rand's, that one essay in Rand, which was very shallow. They act like libertarian anarchists are some freshmen in college who just learned about libertarianism, doing a bull session in their dorm room saying, what the hell do we need the state for? We don't need the state. Let's get rid of the state. They think that's how deep it is. And I just want to say to you and everybody else, it ain't so.
Okay. So
that's a thick book, and that's just to scratch the surface.
Okay. So Sheldon, you are a formidable interlocutor as well. And I wanted to have this discussion, call it a debate. I don't really care, but a discussion with you. And the reason being, because I find that sometimes these things get to be so vitriolic. Like, I could disagree with you. We could do this, have 15 episodes, and I'm going to like you the same when we're done as I like you right now.
Same.
Right? We disagree intellectually. I don't think it's a moral failing on your part. I think you're coming to different conclusions than what I'm coming to. And to me, that's important. But let me just give my pedigree, because I don't work for ARI. I'm not associated with them in any way. I've read Lysander Spooner. From Murray Rothbard, I've read Man, Economy, and State, Power and Market for a New Liberty, Egalitarianism as a Revolt Against Nature and Other Essays, The Ethics of Liberty, The Anatomy of the State. I've also read his History of Money and Banking. I've read his What Has the Government Done to Our Money? I've also read Rawls' Theory of Justice and, Nozick's Anarchy, State, and Utopia. I've read Rothbard's Machinery of Freedom. I've read Barnett's Structure of Liberty. I've read articles by Peter Leeson and Vincent Colosso. I've interviewed Vincent Colosso on the subject. I've also read Arnold Kling on the subject. I've studied up on the merchant law, ancient Iceland, Ireland, Acadia. I'm not somebody that just comes in and says, it's bad.
That's
right?
why I exempted you mostly.
Okay. But I do think that it's a good discussion to have. I understand that there's a lot of people for whom it's irrelevant. It's not irrelevant for me. And ultimately, I'm an egoist and I'm worried about what's relevant for me. But Sheldon, thank you so much. If you want to continue this discussion, we can certainly do that and address your one world state position, some of the other things you have. That's fine. I'm not opposed to it. Sheldon and I also upcoming, I don't know, how far off we're going to have a discussion similar to this one, but about Israel. I just have to study up because I'm out of my league right now with Sheldon. So I do want to study up on it, but I do think that these discussions are fruitful. And for that, I thank you so much, Sheldon.
Oh, thank you.
Where can people find you, Sheldon?
Well, I write an article once a week on Fridays, TGAF, which I've been doing since about 2006. It's at the Libertarian Institute, which is libertarianinstitute.org. But you could also search for me, look for Sheldon Richman Free Association. Just Google that and you'll find my blog, which pretty much mirrors what I have on the Libertarian Institute. I also have a Substack. They're all kind of the same. So if you see what one, you've seen the others.
You've also written a ton of books. Let's not forget about that.
I have some books. I did one on the Palestine-Israel question called Coming to Palestine. It was a collection of essays I'd written over 30 years. Came out a few years ago. I have a book about the Constitution, critical of the Constitution, and more favorable to the Articles of Confederation, but just in a comparative way, called America's Counter-Revolution, the Constitution Revisited. It's on Amazon. You can find it on Amazon. I also have a collection of my last book from a few years ago is called What Social Animals Owe to Each Other. It's a collection of essays on economics, politics, libertarian stuff.
It's interesting that you mentioned your book on Palestine, because I asked Gene Epstein if I could borrow his book in preparation. He didn't have it. He said he'll lend it to me at a later date, but he says, what you really should do is go read Sheldon Richman stuff. And I told Gene, I'm doing this to prepare for a discussion with Sheldon. But Sheldon, thank you so much again. And we'll definitely have you on in the future.
As usual, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Till next time.